Welcome to Resource Rundown. Corey Fleck and Matt Battiali walking you through the key stories and updates in the resource sector. We have a few good topics to get to this week, but Matt, how's it going on your end, man? It really seems like a bull market for gold and a number of other commodities also doing well. So just kind of interested what's on your radar right now.
Yeah, gold is just ripping. I am very impressed by how sturdy copper has been through all of this tariff stuff. And honestly, commodities in general have stayed pretty solid through this. The commodity prices are not pointing at global economic collapse right now.
Hey, that's true. Even the markets aren't pointing at that right now, as international markets and US markets have come back very strongly. Matt, let's get into some of our topics, starting off with the energy markets and a focus on nuclear and uranium. That executive order that Trump signed at the beginning of the week, I believe it was May 26th, that sent energy stocks, nuclear and uranium stocks, especially the US focused ones, soaring. Seemed like that executive order all about fast tracking the regulatory process. Curious your thoughts on all this.
Yeah, it was almost like you listened to our podcast because to me, that's always been the issue was the government reviews take forever, so you don't even know where you stand. It's very, very difficult to invest in something where you could be years waiting for permits. And so the this is a, pretty solid regulatory reform where the NRC has to make a decision within 18 months. That brings new power plants into the realm of investable objects. If there's an 18-month time frame where they have to give you a yes or no answer, I mean, that's brilliant. I really I think that's really important. And I think they can get the work done in that time frame as well. So I actually am in favor of all this. I want to see sensible reform to make decisions on this sort of thing. Lord knows we need the power, and nuclear really is the answer to baseload energy, like we talked about in the past. So,
Matt, one question that I have on all this, and I've talked to people, maybe not so much in the uranium or nuclear industry, but in the copper industry, because we have been hearing rumors about how the US is going to fast track US production of copper. I'm carrying this over to nuclear, but one thing
yeah,
I heard from a couple company executives is that, look, this all sounds nice that they can fast track these sort of government approvals, but the work still needs to be done. And sometimes, if we fast track one certain approval, there's a number of different components that go into building a mine or advancing a project to the point that you're just pushing that work or that analysis onto different sectors, different departments, in the
right.
sense that it is unlikely to truly speed up any sort of actual building of assets. Do you see this as being the same in the nuclear sector or in the uranium sector?
I mean, we'll have to see. The the devil is always in the details. My hope is that no, that they should be able to do these things concurrently. That doesn't mean, for mines particularly, like there are multiple groups that have to weigh in on a permit. There's always the environmental side, there's the land use kind of side, the engineering side. Do we really need this in this location? But from an investment point of view, if I want to invest in this nuclear power plant, I don't want to be sitting on my hands for many, many years waiting for all these permit applications to go through. So if they do them consecutively, that's a problem. Because if it's like the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has to go through theirs and then it goes on to the environmental, that's bad. But if they're doing them at the same time, so if it's a like a comprehensive review that takes care of all of these things at the same time, and 18 months is plenty of time to do the reviews for plants like this, particularly the new ones. This isn't like an old 3 Mile Island setup. These are much more modern. They're much safer. Uh, there should be a reasonable amount of time that we can get a yes or no answer on whether or not we can build one of these things. And then obviously the construction part of this is going to take forever. They don't just happen. You don't just flip a switch and you have a brand new nuclear power plant. But getting through the hurdles so that you can break ground, those regulatory hurdles, is critical. And being able to do it quickly, or at least in a reasonable amount of time, I think it's great.
Now, look, this all ties into the bigger component of we need more energy. Some recent reports, one out of Bloomberg that polled all kinds of analysts, they expect electric energy consumption to increase over 16% in about 5 years. Now, look, we need more energy, we need more electricity. And the shift away from some of the dirtier electricity, like coal, that continues around the world. Nuclear fits into that. We did have wind and solar, all these other clean energy sources really come into the limelight over the last decade and a bit. But those have, through the Trump administration, really been put on the back burner. He doesn't seem to care about those. He seems to be focusing on the nuclear industry. Matt, how does this fit into that bigger picture then of we need more energy? It seems like nuclear is the focus, but again, it takes a while to build. So, what's the allocation that you see happening in terms of market share that nuclear could actually take?
Yeah, that's a bigger question. It's a time question, but it's also an economics question. So how much money is it going to cost to build these things and how long is it going to pay them back? In a high interest rate environment, it may be expensive to raise the capital, which makes the power production expensive, which means that we don't build a lot of these things. There are a lot of claims out there on cost that, we just haven't built any new ones, so we really don't know if that's going to be the case. But I think that, 16% increase in electrical demand is going to send prices higher, which is going to stimulate the market to build more. I think you talked about wind and solar. They really need good batteries. So we still need to see battery tech ramp up. That's going to take a long time too. So in the gap, especially for base load power, for that, I want power when I flip the light switch on, I want the lights to come on kind of power. That's where nuclear really fits the bill because you just once you turn these plants on, they just roll and they are providing power to the grid constantly. And so I think that that's going to be valuable power. It's what they like to call it carbon-free power. This administration doesn't give a crap about whether it produces carbon or not, but who knows in the future. But no, I think that all sources of electrical power generation are valuable, but it comes down to economics and who's going to be able to provide A, cheap power and B, reliable power. Those are the two things. And into that mix, we'll have to go big batteries. We need big batteries to make wind and solar really mesh perfectly with the grid.
Yeah, that's the thing. There is still that component. We are still seeing battery development. I still find that very interesting side of the electricity narrative. But just looking in the
Yeah, me
US
too.
to this executive order, the US has 54 nuclear power plants, some of which have multiple reactors in them. Today, as we're recording this, 9 reactors are not operational. So that's less than, I think, 10% of the total reactors in the US. The focus of this executive order was also restarting some of those reactors. The other side of this is also these small modular reactors. Man, I hear a lot about these, and Ontario, I think, is going to have the first one built in North America, but that's estimated to come at the end of this decade. So we still have a little bit of time, and it still costs a lot of money to build these things. That first SMR, small modular reactor, is estimated to cost over $6 billion. look, it's great to have all these fast tracks of permitting and all this positive speak around it, but we need the money to build these things. We've seen tech start to invest in some of these. That probably is
We
where the
do.
money's going to have to come from because of this whole AI data center build out. And quite frankly, these things can be profitable if you can get them built. So I guess that's the biggest question that I have still for this is where's the money coming from and how quickly will the money flow into this? Your thoughts on that, Matt?
We're seeing some restarts, and they're being supported by tech. So, for example, Three Mile Island, the iconic nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania, they're restarting one of their reactors there, and it's a partnership between the big utility Constellation Energy and Microsoft. Microsoft signed a 20-year power purchase agreement with them, which is what allowed Constellation Energy to invest the like 1.6 billion, I think, to bring this thing back online. And that they're estimating can come online by mid 2028. So there is room for that, for those old mothballed plants to come online. In this case, it's relatively quickly and it's being supported by tech. I agree with you. I think that the big tech companies are going to have to provide some of the capital, even if it's a 20-year power purchase agreement like Microsoft has, which actually, from their point of view, probably makes sense. You know, if you can sign 20 years at a stable rate of cost for your electricity, that's dynamite because who knows in 20 years where the price is going to be. So these offtake agreements have value both for the data center companies, but it also has value in being able to finance these major construction projects, right? I mean that you have the investor, you have the surety of income. That's great. So you can get the loans and get them built.
Now, before we move on to our next topic, as I like to do, before we move on, what's the investment angle here then? If we're hearing all this positive news and the government's getting behind the uranium and nuclear sector, where do you see some of the best opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, I think there, you know, depending on your risk tolerance, there are three areas. Electric utilities have done well and are going to continue to do well. Like we mentioned, Constellation Energy. This is a major electric utility. It's been crazy volatile lately. The share price has been, I think it moved like 30% up and down. This is one that pays a good solid dividend. If I see the share price take a nosedive again, that's one that I would like to own. And then you have the companies that are building the small modular reactors. I think that there's some interesting plays there. Again, though, because of this, because of the news, they reacted. I would be looking to buy them on the dip. And then I'm always looking at uranium companies as potential plays, like the miners themselves. I like Cameco. You know, they're going to be the providers of the fuel. And again, when you're building one of these reactors, typically you have an offtake agreement with a producer for the fuel so that you have a fixed price on your input cost, right? And so you know you're going to have that fuel. Cameco is going to be signing those up, I suspect. So the miners look good to me as well here. So I see that as kind of the three places that I'm looking right now to invest.
All right, on to the diamond sector. This is a sector that, boy, oh boy, seems like it was really all marketing, right? This is an
Was.
oligopoly or monopoly, however we want to call it, where diamonds are not rare, but we get told that they are rare. And that's been the marketing, well, ever since I've been in this world, and I think even before that point. But lab grown diamonds, they are first of all, a whole lot cheaper than they used to be. Since 2020, prices of lab grown diamonds have plummeted by 74%, which is now much more price competitive to natural diamonds. And quite frankly, more lab grown diamonds just mean more of a supply and a much easier supply. Matt, what's catching your eye about the diamond sector?
Oh, the big deal in the diamond sector to me is that De Beers is the diamond name, right? They are the ones who created that scarcity. They branded diamonds. They're the ones that marketed the engagement ring, and they're owned by Anglo American. and Anglo wants to sell them. They've had to cut the valuation of De Beers by $4.5 billion in a year because nobody wants to buy De Beers. So it's amazing. This fall from grace is absolutely incredible. Lab grown diamonds, the diamond mining has been problematic, the whole blood diamond thing and child labor. So the idea that you can go and grow one of these things and it's flawless, it's perfect,